Well, Alabama or Purdue was the big question last week, but this week it is quite clear the Purdue Boilermakers are the number one team in the country.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up? Welcome to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a 5 times per week national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He's Isaac Shade. And today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your 2023 goals. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Well, Isaac, last week, the big conversation on our show, on basically any show talking about college basketball, was between the Purdue Boilermakers, the Alabama Crimson Tide, two teams who have been absolutely rolling all year long. We were leaning towards Alabama, but last week, the two teams made it a little bit clearer for us. Purdue absolutely stomped on Michigan State on Sunday. Really big win for them in the Big Ten. Meanwhile, Alabama, they fell to Oklahoma in the SEC Big 12 Challenge. We're going to talk much more about the results from that challenge later in the show. But to me, this makes it pretty clear. The Purdue Boilermakers, 21-1 on the year, last loss at Rutgers. They're the best team in the country.
They are. There is no excuse for anyone to have any other team at the top of their poll this week, Andy. I just do not see. I spend all day. I just sit here with Ken Palm up and other stuff. I look at resumes all day long. There is no longer any resume right now as of, Monday, January 30th, that is comparable to what Purdue has. Zach Edey, front runner all season for player of the year. And then he goes out and sets a career high in points against Michigan State. 38 points, 13 rebounds on an efficient 15-24 from the field. Like the insane stuff. Fifth 30-point game this season. Honestly, he's not shooting enough. If Zach Edey's doing this and no one's stopping him, then Purdue has to find a way, like Foster Loyer, get him the ball more often. Purdue is off and rolling. Honestly, I don't like, if we're talking Big Ten, let's shrink it down from the national level. There's no Big Ten team that's it's like, if we ask the question, who challenges Purdue? They don't. No one in the Big Ten is there right now. Purdue 21-1 on the year. That only loss was to Rutgers. And for people that aren't all dialed in on football, they're like, Rutgers, or on basketball. It's like, Rutgers, what? No, Rutgers is super legit. 8 straight wins for Purdue, Michigan, Ohio State, just Michigan State, on and on and on. But Andy, they got a big test coming up next Saturday, and I think that's going to tell us a lot because Purdue is headed to their in-state rival to Assembly Hall to take on Indiana, who's coming back alive. Jalen Hood-Schifino had a massive game this weekend. What do you think that game will tell us about Purdue?
Well, I think right now, when you look at the Power 6 conferences, the Power 5, and of course the Big East, like there are not any teams that are dominating those conferences really at all. Purdue is the only team that is dominating their conference. You can maybe try to make an argument that, that's because the Big Ten isn't as good at whatever you want to say there. But the Big Ten is a good Power 5 conference. They have solid teams back top to bottom, and Purdue is just crushing them. There's nobody doing that in the ACC. There's nobody doing that in the Big 12. There's nobody doing that in the SEC, especially not after Alabama's loss. I know it wasn't a conference loss, but it was a loss to a good but not great team in Oklahoma. And so for Purdue, Indiana is one of the big challenges they have left. It's one of the biggest. Indiana on the road is a tough game. It's one of the toughest Big Ten games that anybody's going to play all year long. If they go out and win that game, whether it's by 1, 5, 10, 20, whatever it is, if they go out and win that game, they've kind of proven that there is not any team in the Big Ten that can reliably beat them. And there aren't other teams in all of college basketball who are doing that in their conferences outside of smaller mid-major conferences. It's not happened at the Power Six. It's not happening in the Mountain West. It's not happening in the WCC. Like, it's not happening really anywhere in college basketball. That's a tremendous testament to what Matt Painter and Zach Edey and Foster Loyer and Brandon Smith and that team has done for the Boilermakers. It's incredible.
Andy, let's move to the Alabama side of this, because I think one of the things that's going to happen when we see the new AP poll roll out today on Monday, a lot of AP voters are going to use this to say, oh man, Alabama, got to drop them down 3, 4, 5 spots. We needn't not be so concerned with that, but let me put it to you this way. How much does Alabama's loss, and it's a massive loss, 93-69, the point spread's huge. What does this loss do to impact your opinion of the Crimson Tide?
You know, it's interesting because I think it says a lot about the Big 12, quite honestly. Oklahoma is not one of the best teams in the Big 12. They're not a team that gets talked about in the top 5, the top half of the Big 12 at all, at all. Like, when we talk about the Big 12 on the show and other people talk about the Big 12, you're talking about Kansas, you're talking about Kansas State, you're talking about Iowa State, TCU, Baylor, like Arkansas. You're not talking about Oklahoma, and they go out and absolutely decimate Alabama. Now, Brandon Miller really struggled in this game, 4 of 14 shooting, 11 points. I think the Crimson Tide need to find out who's going to be the person who consistently steps up when he doesn't have a good game, because if you're putting all your hopes and dreams on a true freshman, they're going to have bad nights. It's going to happen. And if Mark Sears isn't stepping up, if Jalen Bradley's not stepping up, if Noah Clowney's not stepping up, they're going to have some issues. Having said all of that, I'm not dramatically dropping Alabama. I'm not. There's so many teams out there that have had stinkers. Almost every team has had a stinker. Purdue's one of the only teams that hasn't had a stinker, and you could argue they kind of did against Rutgers. Like, the teams are, everybody just has an off night. And for Alabama, like, this was a pretty ugly one. And in a kind of high profile situation in the SEC Big 12 Challenge, especially after they kind of got all this momentum in the last few weeks, it doesn't look good, but it's not the kind of loss that's changing my opinion of them very much. I'm moving them down very, very few spots in my top 5 rankings. Looks like you're not moving them down even farther than I am. So definitely not the kind of result that I'm overreacting to.
Yes, because same thing I said about Purdue. It's all about resumes. It's not about reacting in the moment to what happened right now. That's not what we're especially this point in the season. We're looking at the totality, like, not just who have you beaten, who have you lost to, who have you not lost to, all of that stuff. And when I compare, even with this loss to Oklahoma, however embarrassing it may look, when I compare what Alabama's resume looks like as compared to other people's and how they've performed, Alabama's still right there for me. With that said, Andy, let me give you my top 5, and then I want to hear yours. As we've already said, Purdue, unequivocal number 1. Let's not even talk about that. I'm only moving Alabama down to number 2. And if that seems unrealistic to you, that's what I did with, and I don't mean that to you, Andy, I mean that to you listening or watching this. That's the same thing we did with Houston. When Houston dropped down, I didn't drop them below number 2. Just a little bit there, and then they've gotten bumped down a little more, and so they're at number 3 for me. But I'm only moving Alabama to number 2. Let's see what happens. If there's more drop off, sure, at that point I will drop them. But somebody's got to come in and beat them more before I change my opinion of what's been happening the last month. And then at 4, I've got Tennessee. The thing with me for Tennessee, and we'll talk about this more, but it's got to be, the offense has to be consistent. It was phenomenal on Saturday to match that defense. And then I want to keep giving some love to Kansas State. So the Wildcats are going to round out my top 5. Next in line for me is this grouping. I don't have it ordered in any specific order, but Kansas, Texas, Virginia, Arizona, and UCLA, both those Pac-12 schools together. Andy, what about you?
Well, we have the same 10. We have the same 5 next in line, the same 5, or the same 10 total. We only have one difference in our top 5. Obviously, like we said, Purdue number 1, no issue, no debate, no conversation really needed there. For me, I flipped 2 and 3. I have Houston number 2. I do have them over Alabama. I think those two teams are very, very close. Obviously, we saw Bama with that big loss. We saw Houston struggle and lose to Temple as well. I think that those two teams are still very, very comparable. And I think that Alabama could very easily move back up over Houston if they pick up some big wins. But I think they're kind of right in that conversation. just like you, I also have Tennessee at number 4. It was encouraging to see that offense step up in a major way against Texas. If that continues, I think this team will stay in the top 5 for a very long time, quite honestly. And then for me at number 5, I have the Bruins of UCLA still hanging on to a top 5 spot. They lost to Arizona, but Arizona's a really good team. Not exactly a loss that concerns me all that much. The USC loss, more concerning, I'll admit, more concerning there, but I think USC is also a very good team and kind of an underrated team and quite honestly a dangerous team as we get closer and closer to March. But for me, the next in line teams, same ones that you had: Kansas, Texas, Arizona, Virginia, and then Kansas State still getting some love for Jerome Tang and what they're doing at the Wildcats.
Going to be another big week ahead of us in the Big 12, Andy, including Texas and Baylor on Big Monday tonight. Going to be awesome stuff there. Speaking of that Big 12, the highlight of Saturday was 10 games in the SEC Big 12 Challenge, the final one before we move on to new stuff next season. We want to unpack that in a big way. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're super excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because it is the #1 sportsbook in America. And if you're new to FanDuel, even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. So download FanDuel right now so you can bet Super Bowl 57 with a no sweat first bet. You'll get up to, Andy, $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Like, I want my first bet to lose if that's what I'm getting back. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who'll score a touchdown, all sorts of stuff, man. Parlays, you put it together, whatever you want to see. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid instantly. And this is the site I go to already, even before it was our partner for my daily fantasy football action. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Andy, this Big 12 SEC Challenge, SEC Big 12 Challenge, 10 teams. I know we got 4 of the SEC teams left out, but if we learned anything, we learned this. It's hard to win on the road. Home teams were 8-2, and that the Big 12 is as good as we thought they would be with a couple of losses, but they win the challenge 7-3, and I know a lot of it's about matchups. But here's the biggest takeaway from me in this Saturday slate of a decathlon. Let's call it that. I'm getting Olympics happy already. And it's not even close. This decathlon of games, 10 games for us, tells me this. There are so many teams this season that have a legitimate shot at thinking they could be national champions when all is said and done the first weekend of April. We saw it up and down the line all day on Saturday, and not just in this challenge, but this challenge is what we're talking about. Obviously, as we've said, Bama is the most surprising of all of that. But Andy, when you look at this, are you with me on that, or am I stupid? Is this year just so many teams can legitimately feel, hey, we could be the last one standing?
It reminds me a lot of that 2012-2013 season, which was the first year Gonzaga was ever ranked #1. And part of the reason that they kind of got there was because it seemed like a lot of teams who got up to #1 seemed to not want to stay there for very long. And we're seeing that a little bit this year with Alabama kind of falling off. Houston got up there and then they lost the game, obviously. Yeah, UConn was up there for a long time.
#1, but yeah.
I mean, going all the way back to the start of the season, North Carolina, Gonzaga 1 and 2, they are not in that conversation at all anymore. And so you've kind of just seen this constant rotating guard of teams near the top of the rankings. I think if you told people before the weekend, hey, the Big 12 is going to go 7-3 in the SEC Big 12 Challenge, I think a lot of people would have believed that. Yeah. If you said also Alabama's going to lose, TCU is going to lose, and Iowa State's going to lose, I think a lot less people would have believed that. But that's what we saw. Oklahoma, of course, boat racing Alabama. Mississippi State over TCU, that was a pretty shocking one. And then Mizzou bouncing Iowa State. I mean, we're just talking about games that were unexpected results. You know that the SEC Big 12 Challenge is always going to kind of bring out the best of even those kind of mid-level teams in those conferences. But what this has really proven is that no teams are really impervious to having off nights, to having struggles. And because there are so many good but not great teams in college basketball, it kind of creates the situation where the top 25 seems like it's going to be a revolving door all year long.
Yeah, we look at the top of the Big 12 right now. Iowa State, Kansas State, and Texas all tied atop the Big 12. Only Kansas State won,
Mhm.
and the Big 12 was 7-3. I mean, like,
Wow.
that's incredible. Now, I think the highlight game that everyone was looking for, even though it's a down year for Kentucky, is Kansas at Kentucky. But like, Jayhawks come in having lost 3 in a row, and we're like, hey, is this the first time ever under Bill Self that Kansas could have a 4-game losing streak? This is year 20. He's been there 2 decades, and they've never lost 4 in a row. But this could have been it. Kansas comes in and looks like the way it started. Honestly, Andy, I'm sitting there watching. I know you were live and in person at another game, but the way Kentucky started out, I was like, man, is Kansas going to get run off the court there at Rupp? And they didn't. They responded, and they were the aggressors, honestly. But Kentucky here's what the most impressive thing about Kansas was for me. Kentucky made a big push in the second half, but never did Kansas allow them to get back ahead. And I was super impressed by Kevin McCullough, who tweaked his ankle, was gimpy all night, and still had a double-double, knocked down a big 3. Great stuff there. Going back to TCU, one of the big concerns was Mike Miles left that game injured. Per his Twitter, he said, hey, no worries. It's just a hyperextension. Had an MRI on Sunday. It came back structurally clean. Timeline is TBD, but good news for the Horned Frogs. And, just for college basketball, we don't want to see these guys get hurt, not season ending.
Yeah, it was great news for Mike Miles. It was bad news for TCU on the day, unfortunately, for them getting beat by Mississippi State, a game that I don't think a lot of people would have expected to go the way that it did. But yeah, you mentioned the Kansas-Kentucky game, and for Bill Self to avoid that 4-game losing streak, to take that punch from Kentucky. Now, the Wildcats 2 of 13 from deep. When you only make 2 threes and you're playing a top 10 team in the country, you can't expect to win that many games. They obviously have some things that they're still needing to work on over there in Lexington, but it was a really nice win for Bill Self. And then I think kind of the Kansas-Kentucky game was the headliner. There's no doubt about that. The two winningest teams in college basketball history facing each other in the middle of the season when they're not in the same conference. That's going to get a lot of eyeballs, as it should. But the 2 top-ranked teams that played each other in this tournament in this challenge was Tennessee and Texas.
Yes.
Tennessee, number 4 ranked team in the country. Texas came in at number 10. And Tennessee kind of held steady the whole game. They jumped out to a big lead, and they just held it down. They were up 12 at halftime, maintained in the second half of Texas kind of made a push and tried to get back into it. And we alluded to it earlier in the show, but when Tennessee's scoring 82 points, if they're going to score 80 points a game, I'm not sure there's a whole lot of teams in the entire country that are going to beat them at all. Like they are.
I'll go ahead and say there is no team because that defense, come on. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, Texas scored 71 against them, and Texas is a good offensive team. They are good at scoring the basketball, and they still only managed 71. Not too bad, but again, Tennessee's not going to give up 70, 75 points very many times this year. So if they're scoring 80, look out. I think there's a really good chance for the Volunteers to end up being a number 1 seed or a number 2 seed, and the kind of team that a lot of people are going to automatically pencil into the Elite Eight, Final Four, and for good reason.
Honestly, they're owed a number 1 seed because they got jobbed on their seeding last year, and I'm still frustrated about that, clearly. But listen, this version of Tennessee, don't even pencil them in, Sharpie them into the Final Four. But, Andy, it's the biggest if of this college basketball season to me because the defense, I haven't seen a defense match it. What they're doing to hold teams down for shooting from 3, unmatched.
Yep.
I just don't trust. They've done nothing to prove to me that I can trust them season long, or particularly 6 games in a row in March and April. And so I just don't know about that. We'll have to wait and see. Starting the day, Auburn at West Virginia. I thought Auburn was done. I was really impressed, honestly, with the comeback they had. Almost winning there on the road, 80-77, the final. And then Baylor, I thought they had this game put away against Arkansas, but man, Coach Muss had the Muss bus going there down the stretch, and they were able to finagle free throws in such a way that they got a kick out to the corner for a wide open 3 for a shot at overtime, and it just missed, and Baylor wins at home before that game with Texas on Monday night.
Well, we are talking about our new, or was called Quick Hitters. For those of you who have been listening to the show since November, we are now changing the name of our final segment on Monday episodes. It is called the Six Pack, and we are going to go over 6 different games that happened over the weekend. There were so many games, fantastic performances. Of course, we already talked about the SEC Big 12 Challenge and so many fantastic games that came out of that. But there was a lot more that happened over the weekend, starting with the Blue Devils of Duke absolutely obliterating Georgia Tech in this contest. 86-43, doubled them up. That is a fantastic performance from them. Tech shot 31% from the field, only 5 of 22 from deep in that contest. Duke out-rebounded Tech 43-22. Kyle Filipowski, 18.7 boards on 6 of 9 shooting. The other good news for Duke, it was a really nice weekend for them. Not only got a big week, not a great team, obviously, but it's still nice to see Duke back in action and beating teams the way that they should be beating teams. The other good news for Duke is that Dariq Whitehead's injury is not going to be season-ending. The freshman, of course, suffered an injury last week that looked like it might end his freshman year early, a disappointing freshman year for him, but now it sounds like he's going to get an opportunity to get back on the court and hopefully rebuild some of that draft value and help the Blue Devils getting into March.
This is great news. We never want to see these young men hurt for any extended periods of time. I was honestly, Andy, I thought it was an Achilles. I'm so glad that it's not. And yet, Duke is 7th right now in the ACC. Second of our 6-pack is this. There are 2 completely unexpected teams in the ACC top 3. Clemson on Saturday had yet another come from behind win when Florida State just olayed defense on the last play of the game, and one, and Clemson escapes with another victory. They keep flirting with fire, but so far they have not been burned. Elsewhere, Pitt holds on at home against number 20 Miami, 71-68. The Panthers are 3rd place in the ACC. They were down, Andy, 8 points with 2 minutes and 5 seconds left, went on an 11-0 run to end the game and held on to 3rd place in the conference. However, they got to go to Chapel Hill midweek this week. Should be an interesting one there.
Well, the Cougars of Charleston saw their winning streak and 20-game winning streak that they had. They lost 85-81 to Hofstra, the Pride, on Saturday. That ended the streak, the new longest streak in the country right now. Florida Atlantic University, another mid-major program having a monstrously successful year. They beat Western Kentucky 70-63 on Saturday to now hold the longest winning streak in the country. Hofstra, fantastic performance from them. Shout out to the Pride. Aaron Estrada, former Oregon player who transferred out there. He's averaging 21 points per game, and he went 5 of 9 from deep for the Pride in this one. Charleston only made 5 threes as a team. That is not going to get it done for them. Hopefully they can restart a winning streak here. They're still a very, very solid team, but when you're a mid-major program like that, any loss is pretty devastating.
And hopefully takes a little pressure off them and lets them just play under the radar the rest of the way in the CAA schedule. Number 4 in our 6-pack. We don't get to see this too often in college basketball, but we had 2 near triple doubles on Saturday, both of them interestingly from guards. Earlier in the day, Tyler Kolek from Marquette, who, by the way, Marquette, man, they're a legit Big East team. We would say more about that in a second, but finishes with 24 points, 10 assists, and 9 rebounds, Andy. 1 rebound shy of wrapping up this triple-double for Shaka Smart's team. Would have loved to see that. Elsewhere, in Kansas State's win, Marquise Noel, just a little diminutive guy, and yet 13 points, 9 rebounds, and 8 assists. Fell just, obviously, they're 2 assists shy and 1 rebound shy of getting his own triple-double. I was cheering hard for both these dudes to get it, because you love to see it, but just didn't quite get there, maybe on another day.
Well, in a result that I think, had you heard it at the beginning of the season, Creighton is going to beat Xavier by almost 20 points, you'd have thought, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But it looked a lot more surprising when it happened on Saturday. Xavier, the 13th ranked team in the country, having an absolutely incredible season under Sean Miller. Creighton, meanwhile, really kind of took a tumble earlier in the year, had that big old losing streak while Ryan Kalkbrenner was hurt. He's been back. They've been incredible. They went out and stomped all over the Musketeers. Since the day after their 6th straight loss, Isaac, back earlier in the season, they've been the 2nd best team in the country. This is per Torvik's rankings. 2nd best team in the country since then. We knew Creighton was good. We knew that their losing streak was maybe not necessarily an aberration, but probably the record didn't reflect how good they were. But now we're seeing, hey, this is a legitimately really, really good team. And you look at the ESPN bracketology and some of the other brackets that we're seeing, and they're like 7 seed, 8 seed, 9 seed. I wouldn't want to play them. I'm going to tell you that right now. I think that they'll probably end up higher on the seed line when we actually get into March. But right now we got a 3-way tie at the top of the Big East. The Big East has been a remarkably competitive conference all year long. Xavier, Marquette, Providence are all 9-2, and Creighton is right behind them. This is going to be a really, really fun race to see who ends up winning the Big East Conference this year.
I can't believe they have made this comeback. It's pretty fun to watch it all unfold. Speaking though, man, Andy, I was all aboard the UConn train. I had them my number one team in the nation, and they have fallen off so far. In fact, I texted this to you earlier on Sunday afternoon. Georgetown got their first Big East win in 30 tries earlier in the week. Almost got another one on Sunday, had a lead at St. John's and just let it slip through their fingers. Had they done so, it would have been their second win in 2023. Guess who else only has 2 wins in 2023? UConn. I had the tweet all dialed up. Georgetown Hoyas have as many wins in 2023 as the UConn Huskies, but it was not to be, and I couldn't make fun of them. Anyway, moving on to our 6th and final drink. I've got some water here of our 6-pack. Late Saturday night, many of you non-real fans were already in bed, but I was up watching it. St. Mary's having a great year, goes to BYU. BYU earlier this season almost had Gonzaga at home and just couldn't get it. And BYU's like, but we're going to get St. Mary's, who's having a fantastic year. They go ahead, and then Aiden Mahaney just does it to him. The freshman turnaround. I mean, I saw this play unfold, and I was like, no, they're not going to get a good shot off, and they didn't. But Mahaney did enough to get this shot to fall down. St. Mary's wins over BYU 57-56. Mr. Coach Bennett just doing another great job defensively. But, man, for BYU, now have these 2 backbreaking losses at home. Again, Gonzaga, St. Mary's. Aiden Mahaney is shooting, this freshman, Andy, 43.3% from deep, averaging 14.7 points per game. The Gales are on a 10-game winning streak. We talked about a big game upcoming this coming weekend for Indiana and Purdue. Whoo, boy, we got a WCC fun one coming up this Saturday. St. Mary's, Gonzaga. Do not miss it, folks. It's going to be a real zinger. Andy, what do you think about that game? Quick, early take on it.
Oh, it's going to be a really, really fun one. I think if Gonzaga does what we've unfortunately seen them do a lot against Randy Bennett teams, which is kind of allowed them to dictate the pace, St. Mary's is going to play a slow, and I mean slow. If you never watched St. Mary's, if you like watching Virginia or Houston, you're going to love watching the Gales. But if that's not your style of basketball, they could be a little grating to watch. But if Gonzaga lets them set the pace, it's going to be a really, really long night for Mark Few and his team. I'll tell you that right now.
If you haven't watched a WCC matchup yet this season, make sure you tune in on Saturday, and they'll play again to wrap up the regular season. Friends, thank you so much for diving in with Andy, with me to kick off this week. Listen, Andy, every Saturday in college basketball right now is electric, and I just love it, and I always look forward to our chats. This is going to be another one of those weeks. You know what? We got the first rivalry game of this Saturday, North Carolina and Duke.
Yes.
The first game for the two of them in Hansbrough Indoor Stadium since Carolina ended Coach K's regular season career. Well, it's going to be a fun week, very seriously. So, friends, if you haven't already, we'd love it and would be honored if you would give the show a review on iTunes. Just another way to help get the delivery of the show out to people who don't know about it yet. Thank you for those of you who are already doing that. If you haven't, subscribe to the show, smash the like button, leave some comments on today's episode. And you know what? Make sure you come back tomorrow. Make sure you tell a friend, because we love it when you come hang out with us to talk college basketball. All right, friends, that's it for today's episode. Until tomorrow, peace.